So we're up against a mulligan, and we're on the draw with a hand that's a little bit questionable here. Couple big spells along with some 4-drops, but we're missing some lands, which is the big issue. So I think we can take a mulligan here. And I like the 6 better. So we're going to keep, and we're both on 6 cards, so we're at an even playing field here. Here's a summary dismissal. I think I want to put this one on top. We don't know what our opponent's playing against yet, so it could end up being pretty important for us, but now it looks like we're playing against an aggressive deck, so had we known that, we may have wanted to bottom the summary dismissal, but that's okay. And so we'll see if our opponent has an aggressive vehicle start, and that looks to be the case with an apprentice into a smuggler's copter. So the harness lightning we're going to be relying on here for sure. Drew a port town, so we'll just get that in, slide that into play here. We're probably going to want to harness lightning away the copter if we're given that opportunity here. But sometimes the vehicles stack on the play if they go apprentice into copter into something else, which is what it looks like is happening here. It's just super hard to deal with. But if our opponent does not crew the copter, we can just take this hit, I think. So we'll just go to 16 here, and that's going to allow us to anticipate. And so our opponent's respecting potential removal. We see a Radiant Flames, so that's a pretty good card here. I think we want to take it. We could also, there's also some other stuff here that we might want, but let's go ahead and grab the Radiant Flames. And so the question becomes, do we want to Radiant Flames immediately right now to get rid of these Inventor's Apprentices? Or could we potentially save the Radiant Flames? And that's a tough question to answer. Because our opponent might commit another creature here and then crew the copter, and that would be pretty annoying. So I think we can wait one more turn here and take a line where we're just playing our Wandering Fumarole and passing. And that's going to allow us to set up untapped lands for the rest of the game. Now, if our opponent does have something like a Gideon, that would be bad news, but it looks like the copter is going to get crewed here. So let's go ahead and get rid of that while we can. Perfect opportunity to get rid of the Smuggler's Copter. Now the Inventor's Apprentices shrink down, so they're only 1/2, so we don't even necessarily even need to Radiant Flames them away. But it depends what our opponent's follow-up is here. Alright, so it's going to be a Scrap Heap Scrounger. So that is going to now make the Apprentices back into 2/3s. And our opponent does only have 1 card left in hand. So if we Radiant Flames away these creatures, our opponent can get back the Scrounger. But I think we still want to now use the Radiant Flames and just wipe away our opponent's board. And it looks like, I think our opponent may have mistapped there, not having the energy to get back the Scrounger end of turn. Had they not tapped the Concealed Courtyard to cast the Scrounger, they would have had that option available to them. So we have the option now of holding up Summary Dismissal. But rather than doing that, it just feels like the right opportunity to get this Jace Unraveler of Secrets into play. With double Gearhulk in our hand, we're looking for an untapped land to be able to cast the Gearhulk, or just some more gas, which is where we want to be. So we can go ahead and draw this Plains. It's an untapped land, so we can set up Gearhulk for next turn. And even if our opponent is able to get this Jace off the battlefield, which they probably won't be able to do, So yeah, our opponent's just going to concede there. Radiant Flames is one of the best cards in this matchup, and we saw how good it was in that spot. So we want the third one of those for sure. Jeskai is actually pretty decent against control overall. We have 2 more copies of Blessed Alliance, which is decent in this matchup. It's not a great removal spell, but the life gain can be relevant. And so we've got to kind of think about what we want to be taking out here. How might our opponent potentially sideboard? Is a card like Spell Queller going to be good, or is our opponent going to be leaving in removal? Those are the types of questions you want to be asking yourself for this matchup. Don't like Summary Dismissal. Linvala is pretty good. Got a lot of mass removal for the matchup, so I don't really love the Spell Quellers because they get hit by Fumigates and Descend upon the Sinfuls, stuff like that. Revolutionary Rebuff. Our opponent's playing a reasonable amount of artifacts, so it's not the best from that standpoint. So we do need to make some more cuts here. And fine with taking out the rebuff. Negate is also, you can make an argument for taking out Negate. You do want to have some counter spells for Gideon, but we are on the draw. So, yeah, just going to go ahead and take these Negates out because they're really just there to stop Gideon for the most part. We can't counter a Smuggler's Copter on the draw. And so we're playing a removal heavy configuration here and just hoping our opponent doesn't have the turn 4 Gideon. And if they do, then we're hoping that we have the Void Shatter for it. Otherwise, we should be in good shape here. So I'm going to keep this one. We have some nice options with the Harness Lightning and the Anticipate early on here. And a double fast land hand, so normally they're just going to start on the fast lands. That way if we draw a third fast land, we can put it into play untapped. And so this Veteran Motorist, we definitely want to think about just Harness Lightning it away. Although we drew a Fumigate, so we could wait, but nah. I think we want to just get rid of this while we have the opportunity to do so. And the reason why I would consider not getting rid of it here is because we do have this Anticipate. And so we would like to be able to Anticipate, but just doesn't feel like the right moment. And here's an Inspiring Vantage, so now we can go ahead and play it. Now this is the moment where we cross our fingers and say, if our opponent plays a Gideon here, we are pretty dead, but that would require an untapped white source and the 4-mana Planeswalker. Well, there's the white source, but it looks like no Gideon, so that is good news. And not what we wanted to see at all off the Anticipate, but we're just gonna grab a Wandering Fumarole. Kind of flooding out a little bit. So we drew into a Blessed Alliance, which is an interesting draw. We could use it this turn, or we can just save it and plant a Fumigate. I think both of those options, there's arguments to both options. So the nice thing about being able to Blessed Alliance this turn is that we would gain 4 life. But I think we just want to be Fumigating next turn. So I'm just going to play the Wandering Fumarole. And if for some reason we need to Blessed Alliance, we will. Now our opponent does have access to black mana with that 1 energy from the Aether Hub. Which means that if this Scrap Heap Scrounger goes to the graveyard, it's just going to come back. So that's pretty annoying. And there's a Copter, and really not the spot we wanted to find ourselves in. So we do have options. If we Fumigate, our opponent's just going to bring back the Scrounger, which doesn't seem great. We could also just wait till Linvala, which I kind of like that line, and then hold up the Void Shatter. Alright. I was thinking we would need to Fumigate, but now that our opponent has a Copter plus the 2 mana up to get back the Scrounger, doesn't seem that great. We're playing a dangerous game because we're already down to 12, but we're relying on this Linvala pretty heavily. So it looks like our opponent is going to get in here. So we'll see what the discard is with this Smuggler's Copter. Our opponent's still got a ton of cards in hand. So we could activate the Wandering Fumarole or cast Blessed Alliance. But I think I'm just going to take this hit and fall all the way down to 6. So we'll see what our opponent's follow-up is here. And, okay, there's an Inventor's Apprentice. Not going to counter that one. And another Smuggler's Copter. That is a little bit of an issue, so I think we probably want to counter it. Yeah, let's go ahead and Void Shatter that. And this feels like the moment where we want to just play Linvala and hope that it ends up being very good on this board. I mean, it looks good. Now, if our opponent has something like an Unlicensed Disintegration, that would be annoying. So we're going to go up to 11 and get the 3/3 Flying Angel for our troubles, which is going to be able to... We're going to be able to block the Smuggler's Copter here, hopefully, which is a big part of our game plan. And Linvala is just huge. Like, there's no other card that would have quite the same impact on this board as Linvala is having at the moment. Now, our opponent could Unlicensed Disintegration us. That would be bad news. Okay, so our opponent has it. So we'll see if our opponent also has something like a Harness Lightning. That would just be game over here. But it's pretty unlikely that Harness Lightning is in our opponent's deck after sideboard. You never know for sure. So here we definitely want to block the Smuggler's Copter if we're able to, and then we can Fumigate next turn. So we're finally able to get this annoying Copter off the board. Although it does come at the cost of going down to 3 life. So, interesting game here. Pretty close game because we don't really have much gas after this Fumigate. We have a couple of reactive spells here. In Blessed Alliance, we can gain some more life. So we're not really in danger of dying immediately, but if our opponent sticks a big threat here, that's going to be annoying. And the Scrap Heap Scrounger can come back pretty much at will. And so this was the type of big threat I was talking about. Here is finally Gideon, an ally of Zendikar, but it's just so good here. It's one of the best cards in Standard, clearly. So we're just going to play a land, ship the turn. We're going to hope that our opponent makes Gideon into a creature. It would definitely be to our advantage if our opponent decided to do that. So it looks like that is what our opponent's going to do, and try to get aggressive here. But which I understand the reasoning for doing it, but we have double Blessed Alliance in our hand, and so it's going to work out for us. So we can cast both Blessed Alliances with 2 modes here. So to gain 4 and then have our opponent sacrifice a creature. So our opponent's, of course, going to sacrifice the Knight Ally to the first Blessed Alliance. So just waiting for that to happen. And then we can really get our opponent with the second one. So, casting it with 2 modes. Once again, same modes. And there's not too many ways that we could have actually gotten rid of the Gideon, but this was one of them. Most lists don't play Stasis Snares. This one does, so that would have been another out that we would have had. But this makes sense. So our opponent actually has a follow-up Gideon. So now everything becomes a little bit clearer. Okay. So there's the follow-up Gideon. And our draw step is Radiant Flames. So what we can actually do here is we can simply Radiant Flames away the Knight Ally. And then we can get rid of the Gideon with our Wandering Fumarole. So that's actually pretty good for us. And so it's basically going to come down to... It's coming down to top decking. This is definitely a top decking sort of a game. And I think this game favors us, but it could go either way, basically. So Gideon's gonna go down. I like keeping the planes in hand because we have Nahiri in our deck. So if we draw Nahiri or something, we might want to actually discard the planes. So our opponent does have that Scrap Heap Scrounger that is going to probably come back. So we can just pass the turn here. And then what we can do is we can use the Wandering Fumarole now as a blocker for the Scrap Heap Scrounger. So you see how playing this type of manland is so helpful, because it allows us to do something with our mana even when we don't have actual spells to cast. And of course, we're not this time around. We're just not gonna switch the power and toughness on the Fumarole. And so this is just turning out to be a draw go sort of a game. It's likely that our opponent just drew a land there. Otherwise, they probably would have cast whatever it was that was drawn. Pretty hard to see a reason for holding back threats in this sort of situation. And now we have some removal backup, so we don't want to actually use a Harness Lightning on the Scrounger because it's just going to come back. But now that our opponent's played Toolcraft Exemplar, we can definitely think about wanting to get rid of that with the Harness Lightning. And, okay, interesting, we drew a Glimmer of Genius, so I'm just going to pass the turn here. And we're going to allow this Toolcraft Exemplar to become a 3/2. It's possible I should have got rid of it earlier, so we would be able to cast the Glimmer here, but oh well. We don't need to Glimmer right away. So just going to preserve our life total here. Get rid of this Toolcraft Exemplar. And okay, so we're allowed to untap, which is a good sign. Just going to play out lands now, especially because Port Down comes into play tapped. And so now we're able to cast this Glimmer and hopefully take over the game with it. And it looks like our opponent's seen enough and is just going to end up conceding this one. Don't really see how they were going to win. Well, we were very favored. I'm not sure why they conceded, but